Heading out for a day hike can be a great experience on its own, as well as good training if you're planning an overnight or a multi-night trip, as you get used to carrying a load and packing and unpacking your equipment. And so as a teenager and right before my first backpacking trip, I remember seeing people with backpacks and just being intensely interested and curious as to what they took on their travels. And I was about to head away overseas and I was still trying to figure all this stuff out. And at that time, I didn't know anyone who was a backpacker. There wasn't easy access to online information like there is now. And for me, it was very much a case of, well, very experimental trial and error. And I remember my goal at that time being simply to keep my weight under 20 kilos so I wouldn't have to pay excess weight when flying. And I just shudder now to think that I carried that. But back then, that was normal for me. So it's not necessary to go out and buy heaps of special equipment just because you want to go on a day hike. Use whatever you already have at home or can borrow off a friend. So this particular pack is a bike pack, and I originally bought it for trail riding with my mountain bike, and because it's a bike riding pack, there's this extra large pocket for putting my helmet in, which is great for putting in my wet weather gear, but those few times I'm not actually wearing it. And it's got this Airstream vent harness on the back, and that just keeps it lifted right away from my body, and it's great in hot weather. There's a hip belt, and that's not necessary. I don't tend to carry a huge weight with this pack. And above the large front pocket is a zipped pocket, and this is where I keep all my camera equipment. On the sides, it's got pockets big enough to fit a 750ml water bottle. So now to have a look inside, and there's a large zipped compartment with a small internal zipped pocket, which is ideal for my wallet and my keys and my other small bits and pieces. And also on the inside is a compartment suitable for a water bladder, and here at the top is a hole for, this is where the bladder hose goes through, and then when I'm hiking I can reach over my back and drink out of it. And on shorter hikes, I don't bother to take a water filter, as I'm not going to be filling up from unclean water. But that's something you need to consider if you're going on a longer walk. So I use this pack for single day hikes and even for overnight camping, as it's large enough to put everything in. And when I'm going overnight, there's an extra zip that can be expanded, and it gives the whole pack a couple more centimeters. One thing I don't have is a specific rain cover for this pack, and so I've just adapted one of my larger rain covers. It's not ideal, but it does the job. So this pack isn't waterproof, and when the forecast is for a lot of rain, I use this really large bin bag, just pile everything into it, keeps it all good. I do have other pack bags and whatnot, but this is fine just for my day hikes. One thing that always goes in is my personal locator beacon. So if I end up needing help, I can set it off the beacon, which will then send an emergency SOS. And this is one item of gear that I've never used yet, but I'll still never leave home without it. Well, the beacon ideally should be worn on my body, not in the pack, in case I'm separated from my pack, but I've not yet figured this one out, as I don't wear a strong enough belt. I wear a road ID on my wrist, which is engraved with my name and town, along with my emergency contacts and their phone numbers. And emergency services are trained to check someone's wrist and see if they've got a medical bracelet on. And the other thing I've set up on my iPhone 14 is even when it's locked, someone can access my medical info and emergency contacts from the locked screen. Whatever time of day I'm headed out, I always take my headlamp, so that if the day doesn't go as planned, I've got it. I've got some lighting, but it's good if I want to go into caves. And in New Zealand, the other consideration is those days that are wet and gloomy, it's incredible how dark it is in our forests. My first aid kit includes painkillers, a blister kit, sunscreen, an emergency blanket, plus I also take a part roll of toilet paper, a few other bits and pieces with me. For navigation, I use the compass on my phone and the NZ Topo app, which can be accessed even when there's no cell phone cover. On longer trips, I take a power bank so I can keep my phone charged. And some hikers like to use smartwatches for their navigation, and also as they can send and sometimes receive messages with these. And I've not tried this yet. One thing to consider is a smartwatch needs to be on a subscription plan, whereas a beacon doesn't. And it's important to realise the two devices do two different jobs. So depending on my planned hike, I as often as not take my trekking poles. I know every time I don't, I end up wishing I had, and this pack doesn't actually have any way of attaching them on the outside, and my poles are too long, even when they're folded down like they are now, to fit inside, which can be a bit of a pain when you don't need them. Of course, my clothes are going to depend on the season and the forecast. But typically I'll wear a cap like this, which keeps the sun and the rain off my face. If I'm going somewhere more exposed with more sun, I have other hats that actually offer more protection for my ears and neck, or in winter I'll wear a beanie, or if it's extreme, a balaclava. And I hike in shorts or trousers like these. They're tried and tested and comfortable, and I like to have a big pocket on the side, keep my phone in there. I like to keep it handy for navigation and videos. I can grab it easily. But as the phones have got bigger, the pockets need to be deeper, and I have to be really conscious that my phone doesn't fall out. And if need be, I'll move it into my pack or a zipped pocket, just if the track's going to be a little bit sketchy. I'm now more sun conscious than I once was, so I'm choosing to wear long sleeved shirts for sun protection. And again, this depends on the track, as often the entire day I'm going to be in the shadow of the forest. And this shirt is good as it's got a collar which protects my neck from the sun. The sleeves can be rolled up if it's hot and buttoned back. Plus, it's really hot, it's vented at the back, and I can open a couple of these buttons. Hey, if you're finding this helpful, subscribe to the channel. I make videos like this every week. So what's next? Okay, having worn hiking boots for years, I'm now trailing trail runners, and I'm loving the lightness of them, especially when they get wet as the water drains out quickly. And it seems most days I end up walking through a river or just getting rained. The problem with my leather boots is once they're wet, they'll take days to dry and just get heavier and heavier. So my base layers and socks are usually merino. I take this tiny microfiber towel, which is handy, plus if there's a chance of a swim, it does the job, and I can then clip it onto the back of my pack to dry. And of course, since I live in New Zealand where we get 4 seasons in one day, I take a rain jacket or raincoat and a warm jumper. Again, this varies depending on the time of year, but even in summer I'll take a warm layer. It's just better to be prepared. And I wear prescription glasses, including my sunglasses, so I've always got those things with me. So my food depends on the season and distance walked, but for a single day out it's likely to be some fresh food rather than dehydrated, plus extra bars and nuts to snack on. And if it's winter, I might also take my stove, the fuel and saucepan, so I can make a cup of tea or soup or even hot food. And if that's the case, I'll take a spoon and cup as well. And the food I'll just eat straight from the saucepan. I take a small folding knife also. Another kit I take is my camera, the spare batteries, tripod, and other bits and pieces related to the camera and filming. So that's everything I take on the hike with me. And the final thing I wanted to talk about was also having a car kit. So this is a bag you leave in your vehicle, so when you return you've got a complete change of clothes and shoes, some snacks, food, a drink. And after a big walk, I like to make a hot drink to have before driving home. Just gives me a little bit of resting time and a moment to reflect on the day, and also time to let my emergency contact know that I'm safely back at the vehicle. So most people will likely have some version of the things that I've talked about, and aside from the emergency kit, which can be hired at very reasonable rates, you really don't need to go out and buy a whole lot of new gear. Just adapt what you've already got, then over time you can gather more specialist gear as you need it. And if you've enjoyed this, check this playlist out next, which has loads of awesome trail walks to give you heaps of inspiration for your own day out.